Last week, while picking up a few things at the local grocery store, I spotted a flyer on the community board near the exit. It stood out among the usual ads for babysitters and lawn care, knitting, sewing, and crocheting lessons. Learn the crafts of your ancestors and discover the magic in your hands. Beneath the text was a hand-drawn illustration of a skein of yarn coiled into a spiral with stars and moons scattered around it. Intrigued, I decided to call the number. 2 days later, I found myself on the porch of a cozy little house nestled at the edge of town. The woman who answered the door was Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, a sprightly woman in her 70s with silvery hair piled into a bun and warm, knowing eyes. She welcomed me in with the kind of energy that made you feel like you were visiting your favorite grandmother, but there was something else about her, an aura of mystery. We sat down at a large wooden table in her living room, surrounded by shelves packed with jars of buttons, spools of thread, and stacks of fabric. Skeins of yarn were wound into neat balls, and several in-progress projects lay draped over chairs. As we sipped tea, she began to share her story. "You know," she said, holding up a crochet hook, "this isn't just a tool, it's a wand that ties your intentions into the very fabric of reality." I raised an eyebrow, and she chuckled. "Don't believe me? Think about it. Our ancestors used these crafts for survival, yes, but they also believed in their power to protect, to heal, to bind. Every stitch, every knot was an act of will, a way of weaving their energy into something tangible." Mrs. Grayson explained that knitting, sewing, and crocheting have ancient roots in spiritual practices. Across cultures, these crafts were often linked to the divine. The Greeks had the Fates, who spun and cut the threads of life. In Norse mythology, the Norns wove the destinies of gods and men. Even today, in some folk traditions, knot magic is a well-known practice. "Each stitch is a spell," she continued. "When you knit a scarf, for example, you can infuse it with warmth, not just the kind that keeps out the cold, but emotional warmth, protection, love. It's all about your intent." As she spoke, Mrs. Grayson laid out an array of tools on the table. There were knitting needles in various sizes, crochet hooks made of wood and metal, and sewing needles finer than I'd ever seen. "Let me show you something," she said, picking up a crochet hook and a ball of green yarn. "Green is the color of growth and renewal. If I were making a gift for someone recovering from an illness, I'd use green and focus on their healing with every loop." She demonstrated a basic chain stitch, her hands moving with practiced ease. "This is the foundation. It's like planting seeds. With each stitch, you visualize the outcome you want." She handed me the hook and yarn, guiding me through the motions. "Now, think about something you want to grow in your life, a relationship, a skill, even your confidence. Focus on that as you make each stitch." Mrs. Grayson moved on to knitting, pulling out a pair of needles and a soft gray yarn. "Knitting's a little different," she explained. "It's meditative. The rhythm of it can help you focus your intent. In the old days, mothers would knit blankets or clothing for their children, not just to keep them warm, but to protect them from harm." She leaned closer. "During hard times, people used to knit symbols into their work. A certain pattern might ward off evil spirits. A specific color could draw in good fortune. Even today, you can find modern patterns inspired by these traditions." She showed me how to cast on stitches and begin knitting. "Remember, this is about the process as much as the product. It's not just a sweater, it's a shield." Not all uses of these crafts were benevolent, she warned. Knots and stitches can bind too. people used to weave curses into garments or create witches' ladders, strings of knotted feathers, hair, and beads to bring misfortune to enemies. Her face grew serious. That's why intention is so important. If you create something out of anger or jealousy, that energy stays in your work. It's a reminder to always craft with care. Our conversation shifted to the modern world, where crafting is often seen as a hobby rather than a necessity. Mrs. Grayson lamented the rise of exploitative practices like sweatshops and the use of crafts like dogfighting, which she found deeply troubling. "We owe so much to these animals and these crafts," she said. "They've been with us since the beginning, helping us survive. To misuse them is to spit on our ancestors." As we wrapped up, Mrs. Grayson handed me a small square of fabric she had embroidered with a simple heart. "Take this," she said. "It's a reminder that every stitch you make is an opportunity to create something meaningful." She encouraged me to practice what she called mindful crafting. Whether knitting a scarf, sewing a dress, or crocheting a blanket, the key was to focus on the process and the intention behind it. You're not just making something, you're leaving a piece of yourself in it. That's the real magic.